in a moment, but I'm Elizabeth Taylor. I'm the Chief Executive of ERSA. I'm really pleased to be doing this joint event this morning with the IEP and with the Institute, with Tony Wilson contributing. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about Restart, Tony Wilson's views on Restart, and Scott and I were aware that there was a chance we would run separate events, and this just seemed like a perfect opportunity for collaboration between the two organisations, with ERSA with the focus on membership of an organisational level, and the IEP with their interest in the professional development of staff in the sector and the opportunities and challenges that Restart will bring. So it's really good to collaborate and to work together on this, and I hope it's the beginning of many events of this kind. Scott, do you want to say a few words before we hand over to Tony?
Yeah, I've got a few things that I want to obviously present to you and discuss following Tony's analysis before we get into Q&A. But yeah, I'm Scott Parkin. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Employability Professionals. Our job is to enable organisations and individuals to be the best that they can be through CPD, through learning and development, and to make sure that people are practising to the correct standard. I'm really excited about doing this event with ERSA and with IES. We have to be careful there, IES and IEP, but it's in Tony's institute. And it's really important that we join forces and collaborate really effectively to make sure that we support the sector as a whole to deliver the best possible outcomes for the customers that really, really need our support.
Okay. Is it worth, just as we admit the final people, just putting it into context that Restart is the DWP's Tier 1 commission that is taking place at the moment? I'm sure most people on this call are already engaged with organisations that are on Tier 1 of the new CARES framework with the DWP, but if you aren't, the clock is ticking, and I would say to you to have a look at the opportunities hubs that have gone out through ERSA and to look at who's likely to be bidding in your area. Okay, last few people coming in, Tony, and then I think it's over to you.
Great stuff.
Yeah, go.
I think I'm just going to go for it. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do.
Great, thank you. This is great because I've just finished typing out the slides. So look, thank you so much for having me. And wow, there's a lot of people here, which is fantastic. It's really great to see. Somebody is going to have to shout out. I'd suggest Scott or Elizabeth, just to make sure. Can you see my slides?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah, all good.
Thank you. So we've got 2 hours, and we might need all that time. I think it'd be great. I mean, we're not having, I don't think, many events like this over the next few weeks. But I'm not going to talk for 2 hours. Obviously, I'll probably talk for about half an hour, I think, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Maybe a bit more, maybe 35-40 minutes. And we'll open it up for discussion and collaboration. So thanks so much for having me. So this, as Scott and Elizabeth have said, I mean, it's kind of started in the run up to Christmas and the publication of the invitation to tender for Restart, which I just think is the most fantastic opportunity, once in a generation opportunity for all of us who are keen to and want to improve outcomes for disadvantaged people and improve employment opportunities for those who are out of work. And run up to Christmas, sort of looking at the tender specification and discussing it with people, I asked if Elizabeth would be so kind as to take a piece from me about with some reflections on Restart, some of the real I just dropped out then. Hopefully you can still see me. So this is so what I wanted to cover really was these 4 areas here. So first, some background to the Restart programme. Secondly, then some of the key features of Restart, the ITT, and how they stack up. So my assumption is on this call that we've got people who are in that sort of top tier of prime providers who are prospective bidders who'll know the detail inside out. We've got others who are people who are delivering employment services and who may know a bit about Restart, but not like all of it. So hopefully some of that will be helpful. But then also, I know we've got a lot of people on who are from different levels of government, local and national government, research organisations, and sort of wider policymakers and stakeholders. Some of this may be sort of relatively new, or you might have quite a different interest or perspective on this. Then I'll talk about the timescales for Restart, the commissioning process, and how bids will be assessed, and then what needs to happen to make this a success. And I won't spend too long on that, but I think that's where we'll focus more of our discussion. So starting with the context piece. So this shows the unemployment rate back to the early 90s and the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility's latest forecast, which is a November forecast. So pre kind of, this third wave or second major wave of the crisis and the third lockdown. But nonetheless, their forecast of what's going to happen to unemployment over the next 5 years. The middle dotted line here is a central scenario. There's clearly a downside risk here that we see unemployment going very high, which is what many of us thought would happen last summer. But an upside risk, it may not be so bad. Either way, we're going to see significant increases in the unemployment rate over the next year, likely to around the levels it was in the last crisis, and potentially, some risks it could be higher. And what happens when unemployment goes up is that long-term unemployment goes up, and long-term unemployment lags unemployment. So here I've put on the right axis here the level of long-term unemployment in the yellow line. And this really stands out. You can see how elevated long-term unemployment has been in previous crises, but also you can see how the line is a bit further to the right, particularly when you look at the Great Recession 10 years ago. So typically a lag of about a year or so, which isn't a surprise, but it's a really important point for all of us to understand. Growth in long-term unemployment is driven by inflows to long-term unemployment. It's driven by, the fact that a lot of people become newly unemployed now and over the last year and will become long-term unemployed next year. So there aren't any sort of forecasts of long-term unemployment, official forecasts produced of long-term unemployment, but I think it's well plausible. We'll see it above 800, around 900,000, and potentially could be up above 1 million if we're not careful over the next year or so, and likely to peak probably in 2022. And long-term unemployment is bad all round. It's bad for individuals because being unemployed leads to permanent impacts on your future earnings, the quality of your work, your physical and your mental health, has impacts on your families and children, and impacts on your well-being, your happiness, your life satisfaction. But repeat spells of unemployment, long-term unemployment, are particularly damaging. Repeat spells of unemployment and long-term unemployment are particularly damaging, and have really significant fiscal costs in terms of lost output and the costs of through the benefit system of financial support. It's not inevitable though. We can address this, and by reducing the frequency of spells and getting people back to work, we can reduce the impacts of those scars. And it's important to be clear, and this is certainly where the Treasury have been coming from as well, that long-term unemployment has significant economic impacts as well, because it leads to permanently reducing, potentially, the size of the labour force. It means there's fewer people looking for work, and that then means we'll have a weaker recovery and more significant risks of inflation. As employers start to report, for example, skill shortage vacancies. I'm waiting for the first press reports about employers not being able to fill their jobs at the same time as there being elevated unemployment. So how we support more people who are long-term unemployed is clearly really key. Now, the government has announced a lot of stuff since this crisis began. Here is really just a selection of them. And Restart is just one of the things. So we've got a particular focus on young people, a particular focus on kind of supply side measures to increase support for the unemployed, less of a focus on training, frankly, and less of a focus on measures on the demand side. But here is just a selection of some of the measures that have been announced in various fiscal events in the last few months. There's a real question about how it hangs together, how we make this a consistent offer for individuals, and ideally a guarantee for individuals. But Restart is just one part. And Restart is, as you all know, particularly focused on addressing long-term claimant unemployment. So claimant unemployment is people who are claiming out of work benefits and are treated in the benefit system as being unemployed. So they're required to look for work or be available for work. Well, both actually, to look and be available for work. May not be reported as unemployed on the official measure of unemployment, but are treated in the benefit system as unemployed. So this is particularly job seekers allowance claimants, those with contributory records, and people in the searching for work group of universal credit. And in this case, as I think many of us know, the big increase in claimant unemployment has already happened. These are inflows to claimant unemployment from the start of 2019 through to August 2020. We've got the most recent data, and I'll focus just here on those who are out of work, because a small number of claimant unemployed can be in work, and just focus on England and Wales, so the equivalent of Kickstart, Restart eligibility. 1.5 million people have signed on as claimant unemployed just in the period between April and June. And numbers are still really elevated, about 90% higher in August than they were in the equivalent period the year before. So a bit about the Restart design then. So Restart is building on 20 years, more than 20 years of support for long-term unemployed groups. And I won't do the whole sort of history lesson now, but you go right back to the late 90s, early 2000s with the New Deal programs, which many of us will remember pretty well, where it had an advisor-led gateway of support and then very specific options, so quite a prescriptive design, which then through the 2000s was adapted and tested through private sector-led provision, and also through a slightly different but important to note model of employment zone support, which allowed for greater degree of black box of unprescribed support, if you like. New Deal started to be replaced by the Flexible New Deal between 2008 and 2011. This was contracted out, advisor-led model again, more flexibility on design, but with a requirement to offer 4 weeks of full-time activity during the period people are on the programme. And then, as you'll know, the work programme introduced 2011 onwards. Again, contracted out, advisor-led, black box model, highly outcome-based and serving a really broad range, not just the unemployed, but also people with significant health conditions who are not looking for work and were not available for work. So there's a range of evidence we can build on what does and doesn't work. And I'm pleased to say, I do think the Restart spec does reflect that really, really well. And it really feels leaps and bounds, feels like it's come on leaps and bounds compared with, for example, the work programme in particular. And so here's the kind of the key features of Restart, which I won't spend too long on. But just wanted to just make sure we had a kind of, as far as possible in one slide, tried to capture as many of the points as we can. So firstly, eligibility. We limited to those who are continuously claimant unemployed for 12 months or more. So you have to be claimant unemployed. It doesn't count spells of furlough. So it's the clock starts when you start claiming. Time on job seekers allowance will count, it looks like, but it's got to be 12 months of claiming. There'll be some limited scope for early referral or for referral of different groups, which looks like about 10%. I think it's about 10% of, I think it's set at a maximum 10% of contract volumes. There'll be 1 year of support on the programme when you're referred. Work programme is 2 years. We evaluated the work programme with other organisations. And I think that the 2 year service period in the work programme contributed to or increased the risks that some people were parked, that some people ended up not receiving significant support. It was an important experiment to try having really extended periods to see if that led to longer service, more support and more intensive support over a longer period. Actually, I think what happened was many people didn't receive as much support in that second year as in the first. So it's good to see that Restart will have a shorter service period. That's one of the key things we called for back in April when we published our Getting Back to Work report, which called for something like this. It's going to be about £2,000 funding per participant. This is hugely better. These are cash terms, actually. It's not real terms, but compared with the work programme. But even if even without sort of real terms funding in the work programme, it wouldn't be massively different. But this is hugely better than the funding in the work programme, where spending averaged £1,400 over the programme, and that was, as I say, for 2 years of support rather than for one. So £2,000 funding per participant means we've got enough to provide really good quality, in my view, good quality one-to-one support for participants for a year. And there are clear guaranteed service levels, which I'll come back to in a future slide. But this is, again, a real change from the work programme, which was entirely black box at the commissioning stage. It wasn't black box in terms of what providers bidded to deliver. They bidded to deliver specific services. But this time there'll be clear service levels, guaranteed service levels written into the contracts that all will need to meet. The contract's going to run for 3 years with an option to extend. That's a sensible length of time, I think. There are some arguments to go longer, but I think 3 years is reasonable and sensible, particularly with extension, with the opportunity to extend it. Probably my biggest problem with the design of Restart is the job outcome measure. And on this, there's going to be a single measure of employment outcomes, and that will be cumulative earnings of about £3,700 over the time on the programme and a 6-month monitoring period. So actually the bar is set pretty low for measuring what a job outcome is. There's no reward for job quality, there's no reward for progression in work, there's no reward for increased security. It's cumulative earnings over a period of time. So there's a sort of a sort of a negative mark, if you like, on I think on the job outcome measure, but important to understand the definition there. And then just looking at kind of what the expected performance and the payment by results model. So about 70% of the contract value will be tied to these outcomes, which is less than was the case in the work programme, but it's in line with what happens in work and health programme, with 30% paid as a delivery fee. And DWP expect that between 25 and 33% of participants will achieve this outcome, which I'll come back to later and do a bit of analysis on. Final point then, there's a price accelerator for performance above 21%. And this is to try to incentivise higher outcomes and to try to minimise the risks of participants being parked. So parking is probably the most significant risk we've got in the design and delivery of Restart, and the price accelerator is intended to sort of mitigate that risk. Again, I think this is one area where in my blog for ERSA, I did sort of raise concerns. I would have rather seen different, distinctly different groups identified within the programme with different performance expectations and service guarantees as a better means to try to mitigate past parking risks. But I think this is something that can be addressed in live running, particularly given that providers will be setting out their performance offers and be setting out what services they will be delivering. So those are the key features of Restart. I said about the service standards and the sorts, in effect, the service guarantee. So this is what it is in a nutshell. It's a much higher degree of prescription than the work programme. It's far less than we had in New Deals, for example. But there'll be 8 customer service standards. You'll notice there's only 6 bullets. I've just combined it a bit just to make it easier. But there's 8 customer service standards, which between them will cover ensuring there's a face-to-face initial meeting, which must be achieved for the large majority within 15 working days. There should be one-to-one support delivered at least fortnightly, and I think this is almost certainly going to need to be more than just a kind of a phone call or a text message. So one-to-one support at least fortnightly, and a face-to-face meeting at least every 4 weeks. There also needs to be a smart action plan agreed within 8 weeks of referral and needs to be updated every 4 weeks. A diagnostic assessment, which I'm less keen on. I think we spend too long assessing people's barriers. But anyway, a diagnostic assessment within 8 weeks of referral, again, which needs to be updated, although thankfully it'll only be updated every 4 months. And interestingly, importantly, there's going to be a customer satisfaction measure, single question measure of satisfaction, and providers will be benchmarked against each other. And those who are doing worse on customer satisfaction will be expected to improve. So that, as if you think that through, that means that should be a continually improving measure as the department works through trying to improve low scores. That will raise the average, which in turn will mean different people falling down to the bottom and then raising the average again. So that's really positive to see customer satisfaction there. The department's been clear in the tender that they expect to see offers of clearly personalised, tailored support and work-focused support. And there's a really strong emphasis on local partnerships, which I'll come back to in a minute. And that's, again, really welcome. And finally, point again I made in the blog, it's good to see that the use of sanctions or the threat of sanctions has been dialed right down compared with previous DWP provision. It's important we follow through on that in delivery, actually, because clearly, political priorities can change. But it's really positive to see that there's a really strong focus on engagement of participants, making sure people start because it's a good quality service rather than because they have to be there, and that sanctions will only be, will be able to be used. They're not going to be switched off, but there's a clear expectation that providers are demonstrating how they're ensuring that people engage with the programme rather than relying on conditions and sanctions. And in my experience over more than a decade, that's what providers repeatedly say they want is to be able to deliver a good quality service and not to be the policeman acting on behalf of the department. So I think that's a really positive point. So there'll be 12 contract package areas. This is the map. and there'll be one provider in each. There'll be no competition between providers within areas, and there'll be no choice for the department in referring or for individuals in the services they offer. I think that's that is a drawback. That is a drawback. There being this lack of competition, this lack of choice, and it means that, and it does make performance management harder. But I think on balance, it's probably the right decision. Because having a single provider will much better support local alignment, integration, and partnership working. But these are really difficult balances, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if in 5 years' time we're all coming back and saying we need much more competition and choice because the costs outweigh the benefits. But important to note, there's no competition, there's no choice. It'll be a single provider in each area. These slides will be circulated, so you'll be able to look at this in more detail at your leisure, but I just sort of broadly run through what some of those are. So starting with the north, the northeast, and the northwest. One CPA will cover the northeast of England, Humberside, and parts of North Yorkshire, including York. That's going to value about £200 million. The northwest contract will have basically the same value, and that will cover the whole of the northwest region, excluding Greater Manchester. Then down the bottom right corner there's Greater Manchester will be its own contract area. And then also in the north, there's an area then which covers, in effect, I put this one in the north, but it covers the sort of the Midlands as well, the East Midlands, bit of Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, plus South and West Yorkshire. So these are, all these CPAs look great. I mean, these are great ones to be working in. Clearly, that South and West Yorkshire one that's in effect is Sheffield City region and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, straight Leeds City region, plus Notts and Derbyshire. The north, I put in here as well the LEPs that are covered and the shortlisted prime providers. Then moving down, Midlands, Southwest, and Wales. The Midlands ones on the left-hand side, we've got then in effect the West Midlands Combined Authority, Worcestershire, and the Marches. So that will be dominated by the West Mids Combined Authority. That's the sort of the that's going to be what drives kind of partnership working, and I think delivery in that CPA, £250 million value. There's then I think a more difficult one, frankly, which covers the kind of East Midlands and parts of the West Midlands. So it includes the Potteries in Warwickshire, for example, Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, South East Midlands, but still sizable value as you'd expect. Then the West Country and the Southwest, that hangs together pretty well as a CPA. It is in effect the whole of the Southwest plus country, and then Wales, which is its own CPA, relatively small value because there's relatively obviously fewer people live in Wales, and that'll be I think quite a healthy competition between the 5 shortlisted providers there. And then looking in London, the south and the east of England, London has been split. I haven't actually checked in detail, but I'm assuming it's the case that this simply reflects the sub-regional partnerships. It certainly looked like it from looking at the map. But in effect, you've got the kind of West London Alliance and Central London Works. Beg your pardon, Central London Forward is CPA 5B. This is a beast of a CPA, £350 million, and will be. And I think will be one that providers will be really keen to get. That is a sort of a small area, high value, and really strong existing partnerships. And then in effect the sort of South London Partnership and what's called Local London, I think, is it? I should know, but covers outer London in effect, kind of south, north, and east. £235 million. Again, great contract to win. Potentially, and then these two here, one covering east of England, Kent, and East Sussex, is huge value, really significant value, very large area, and then one covering, sorry, I say east of England, it also includes Peterborough, which I think is in the East Midlands, am I wrong? And then a kind of a southern England one, which covers my neck of the woods in Brighton and Hove, also covers Thames Valley, Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Solent, and West Sussex. So those are the 12 CPAs. Quick run through. I think just to reiterate and to emphasise, all of those primes right now, I expect, will be trying to find the right people in combined authorities, local enterprise partnerships, and local partnerships to have conversations about aligning provision. And it's clear in each of those, you've got a couple of really standout areas, which are either combined authorities or they're really well-established LEPs and local partnerships that are going to have to be around the table in design, helping to co-design, and then to partner in delivering the model. So how am I doing? 20 minutes in. Okay, good. So commissioning and procurement. Right now, we're in really the most important bit, which is when providers are kind of forming their responses. They'll be putting their supply chains together, and they'll be coming up with their performance offers, working through what's feasible and not, and really thinking through the design of their services, and obviously how they answer the tender questions. So those responses have to be submitted by a fortnight today, so no time at all. There's then 1 month of commercial dialogue, which is a structured approach to discussing bids, and where there'll be changes made to bids and also to the assessment criteria. Then there'll be final offer responses have to be submitted by 15th of March. The assumption is contracts will be awarded on the 7th of May. There's then a standstill period and then go live at the end of June. That is an incredibly compressed timetable. It's particularly compressed for this next fortnight. So it's going to be a lot of work for those primes and for anybody who's involved in supply chains or anybody who wants to try to influence the design of Restart to be working hard over the next 2 weeks. There'll be a maximum of 2 contract package areas per prime, which means there'll be at least 6 providers in total. That's good. I think 6 is a good number, and it means that there's risks. If a single provider fails or a single CPA is significantly underperforming, then there will be a market of existing providers that are able to pick up poor performance. 6 also feels like a manageable number. It may be more. It could be 7, 8, or 9, but it feels like a manageable number for trying to bring people together and share practice and collaborate. There's a 65-35 split then on quality versus price stroke performance, and I'll talk through that next. No, I won't. I will talk through that in a minute. So point I wanted to make first, though, before we talk through the assessment process in more detail, is that rollout is going to take time. We're starting this quite late. It's been clear since April that we were going to need something like this. But the department, for entirely understandable reasons, has gone through a 2-stage process, and we're just bad luck really that the umbrella agreement, which had been intended to be done, wasn't in place when the crisis broke, and so we had to go through an accelerated process to get the umbrella, the framework in place that the bidders could then use, that would then determine the shortlist for bidding for the programme. But it does mean that we're starting quite late, and it's going to take time for provision to be in place. So this is sort of my estimate based on the tender documents of my reading based on the tender documents of how provision is going to build cumulative places. So that's the blue line. And then the yellow line is the number of people who'd be flowing through 12 months claimant unemployment if 10% of those who start a claim reach the 12-month point. It could be less than 10% if we have a really strong economy over the next few months, which doesn't feel very likely. Could be more than 10% if we have a weak one. But 10% was typically the rule of thumb that we always used to use for the number of people flowing through the 12-month point on JSA, for example. We don't have published data on that for universal credit, unfortunately. It's another story. But if we use 10% of a rule of thumb, then you can see here, we're going to be massively oversubscribed by a factor of 9 or 10 when Restart goes live. And if the dotted line here then just let's assume that for the next few months, the claimant count continues to run at 90% higher than historic trends, which is what it was doing in July, August, most recent data, then in that case, supply of places on Restart won't catch up with demand, the flow through to the 12-month point, until early 2022. So what does that mean in practice? Well, that means that really for between July and December, the people who be referred are unlikely to be 12-month claimants. They're likely to be 18-month claimants, I think, or they're likely to be really significantly disadvantaged. They'll be the ones who simply cannot wait to be referred. There's a parallel here with kind of vaccine rollout, isn't there, and the ordering of that. My expectation is the department will be referring into Restart the people who are most in need rather than the people who are closest to work out of that potential cohort of 12-month plus. So that has implications for performance offers, but also it's got implications for how we describe and think about the programme and the sorts of services we offer. So the assessment criteria in a bit more detail. There's 5 important, key quality criteria. There's a few others which are pass or fail, but there's 5 key quality criteria as follows. The first 3 between them are worth 3/4 of the quality mark, and that's service delivery. So explaining your service offer, but in particular setting out how it will be personalised and will meet the needs of particular groups. Engagement, which I was quite surprised to see having such a weighting, but I think it's a real positive. So this is about showing how you will engage with participants, how you'll maximise the referrals to starts ratio. That's been a particular problem in work and health programme, which probably explains why it's been brought out here as such a big focus. But also, providers will be required to say what their caseload sizes are, and I fully expect the department will keep a close eye on those and note those, and that'll be one of the things that they'll talk to providers about in delivery as well. The third is about stakeholders and local integration. And this includes employers, but is mainly focused on sort of local integration. And note the asterisk here. At the final offer stage, this question will be CPA specific. The current question, which is generic, will be replaced by one specific to the CPA. And the only people who'll be assessing that bid will be 2 CPA representatives. So this is not something that providers will be able to blag. You will have to have a pretty robust plan for this one. So the local point is clearly being taken really seriously. And then 2 which are important, but slightly lower weighting. The first is on performance rationale, so explaining why the performance target that providers set is achievable, but includes, importantly, a requirement to set out how providers will collaborate with other providers and with wider partners to share practice, to test and learn, to innovate, to improve, which is really welcome to see that. And then finally, social value, which is generally a requirement in all public procurement, but importantly, the department and in a welcome and its welcome have put in quite a crunchy social value requirement, which is around things like diversity in staffing and diversity in supply chains, which is good to see as well. So there's a maximum score of 7 for each of those criteria, and the pass mark is 5. So in effect, as long as providers get up to pass level at all, on all of the criteria, then you're either getting a 7 or 5. There's not much differentiation. There's no differentiation in scoring beyond that. I'll come back to that. And then on price and performance, it's welcome the department have not gone for a straightforward cost weighting. So it isn't just 35% is on cost. It's 35% is on a combination of your performance offer and the price that you offer to do it at. So a formula has been used, which then produces something called the financial evaluation metric, and that's based on your performance offer above 25% and your unit cost in effect. The lowest financial evaluation metric gets 35%, and then other bids are scored proportionately relative to that. And DUP's expected performance range is 25 to 33%. So between a quarter and a third are expected to achieve an employment outcome. So how plausible is that 25 to 33%? So it looks like it is pretty plausible. So the department have shared with prime providers some analysis which sets this out, which obviously I haven't reproduced in full, but I have put in just a couple of excerpts from it. But basically, the most important bit of analysis in that is that they have done a data matching exercise using HMRC PAYE data to identify those participants, to identify those individuals who were flowing through the 12-month point, 15-month, 18, 21 and 24-month point of claimant unemployment, find their data and then match it to the HMRC data to see what proportion went on to achieve £3,500 more or less equivalent cumulative earnings over a subsequent period, so taking account of the kind of tracking period. So this graph here shows then the range. The red line there is people who are the 24-month flow through unemployment and achieved the equivalent employment outcome. And that's a low, if you like, a 21% getting an outcome. And then the green line is people flowing through the 12-month point going on to get outcomes. So that gives you a range of 21 to 30%. If you just focus on the 18-month group, which seems like a potentially more reasonable one than the 24-month group, then you've got a range of 25 to 30%. Now, this was done for the period 2014 to 2019. And 2014 to 2019 was a time of a relatively stable economy. That's how DUP describe it as well in the analysis, a stable economy. But you tend to get weaker performance in the depths of a downturn. You get stronger performance in the recovery period. And sometimes you get a lot stronger performance. So they've also then done some analysis, which is then looking at trends in off-flow rates. This then just uses off-flow rates, but it applies it to the earnings measures. Trends in off-flow rates over different economic periods, covering poor, recovering, and expanded. So expanding is like when the economy is booming in effect, and looked over time at how that looks. So so that then gives you the range that's in the bottom right corner on this table. And again, it varies quite significantly depending on whether somebody's 12-month unemployed or 24-month unemployed when you start measuring it. But just to give a kind of a broad range here, again, focusing on the 18-month group, you've got 17% getting outcomes in a poor economy, depths of recession economy, which God forbid, I really hope isn't what we're going to be facing when this goes live, and it shouldn't be what we're facing in the autumn. And that goes as high as 38% for the 12-month group in a sort of booming economy. So quite a really significant range. Important side note here, just the extent to which this is all determined by, is driven by the economy and how poor our kind of payment by results models are reflecting economic factors and adjusting for them. This is something that we've grappled with over the years, and work I've done with colleagues, with people like Dave, who I think is on the call, Dave Simmons. It's really hard to get good quality, well-designed outcome-based programs when you've got so much variation that's driven by the economy. Anyway, so my view, I think early years, we're going to be talking about 15 to 18-month unemployed making up the majority of those referred. So you're going to be more at the lower end of performance, but I'm always an optimist. And I think with justification, I think by the end of this year, we'll be seeing really significant growth in employment as we come out of this crisis, because we've protected incomes. I know there's real problems with this crisis. There really are, and I've written and talked a lot about this over the years, particularly the impacts on low-income workers and those on lowest incomes generally. But we protected incomes to a far greater extent than previous crises, and I think that will feed through into much higher consumer spending and quite a strong recovery. So I think you could be looking at, you're probably looking at that kind of 25 to 35% range. Final point made to me this morning, that furlough time isn't counted in this. So it's worth remembering some people who'll be starting claims now may well have been out of work for a long time already. So could be quite significantly disadvantaged by the time they reach restart eligibility. We all have to have a think about what the implications are of that, but I think it could mean we see lower performance. Now, will this just end up being a price-based competition? So the risk with any procurement process is that if everybody scores the same marks on quality, then it just becomes who offers the cheapest bid. And this is what's happened in other procurements in the past. It's in effect what happened in the work programme, I think. Now, the government has tried to mitigate this to some extent by linking price and performance in the measure of in the kind of price bit of the measure. And that's intended to encourage providers to find a sweet spot between job outcomes and price discount. But does it incentivise discounting over achieving outcomes? So I've done some analysis on this, which this is probably where I think subsequently, probably in a week or so, I'll be somebody will go through it in detail and say, show it's not right. I'm pretty sure it's right, but performance, I think the measure does appear to bias, well, it does bias more towards price and performance. And I think the consequence of that is that I really think DWP need to set a price floor to avoid gaming in the procurement process where providers offer extreme discounts but relatively low performance. Price floors are not ideal. And I was having this chat this morning with Dan Finn, who I think might be on the call as well, and you might want to say more about this in the conversation. But in Australia, apparently they use price floors, and the consequence is everybody offers a price floor. It just becomes the going rate. So that could be an argument for setting quite a high price floor if everyone is just going to hit it. But I think we need something, because I think the metric risks leading to really significant discounts. So to illustrate this, I put in here in bold. So this shows basically reading left to right the performance offer, assuming it's in a range between 25 and 35%. And then reading top to bottom, it shows a discount, assuming providers offer between a 0% and a 30% discount. So I thought, well, what would I offer if I could, all things being equal? I think my starting point would be, I'll offer 30% and a 10% discount. So that would get me an FEM here of 10.8 million. There's God knows why why it's got so many zeros, but it has. So let's call it 10.8. Give me an FEM of 10.8. Now I thought, if I offer 25%, how much discount do I need to offer in order to beat that score? And the answer is, if I offer an 18% discount and a 25% performance offer, then I beat somebody offering a 10% discount and a 30% performance offer. The sort of taste test for me, that doesn't feel right to me, if I'm being honest. I think they could have addressed this just by not squaring the numerator, which was how I'd initially done this analysis. But that feels quite challenging to me. And it means that if you just offered a massive discount, a 30% discount, so if you said I'm just going to do this at work program prices, for example, you got a 7.8 FEM. then even at 35% performance, in order to be 7.8, you would need to be offering 35% performance and an 18% discount. You know, that doesn't feel quite right to me. So we are where we are on the metric, but setting a price floor would minimize those risks. So of course, it doesn't, you know, who gets marginally more or less isn't necessarily as important as whether you can make that up again with your quality mark. So that's the other important point. You might accept you're going to score less on price, but you're going to say, I'm going to max it out on quality and therefore I'm going to win. So just to run through again, 7 marks maximum, 5 marks pass, and there's 3 quality scores that are each worth a quarter of the total quality mark. So on those main 3 quality scores, if you get a 7 rather than a 5, that's worth 4.6% of your total bid, your total mark. So if I score a 7, well, I've said it, I'm like 7 divided by 5 is different, 4.6. So if there was a low ball bidder who wants to win on kind of cheap mediocrity, can they beat a more costly but higher quality bid? So the next example assumes the low ball bid offers 28% performance with a 25% discount, which kind of feels like people are going to be expected to offer performance at kind of level, and a 25% discount, and it is potentially worrying. So let's see if I can explain this one. 28% performance, 25% discount, that person gets 35%, they get top marks. So what I've said here is, at these combinations of performance and price, green would beat the low ball bid if the low ball bid drops one mark. Well, in effect, it's 2 marks, isn't it? It scores a 5 rather than a 7 on any one of those 3 main quality criteria. People in the orange group are required the low ball bidder to drop 2 marks, so to score 2 5s and a 7 instead of 3 7s, and then they'd win the bid. And people in the red mean they need to drop all 3. They have to get 3 5s rather than my bid, which will be 3 7s. And so I think, you know, if I'm feeling like there's a risk that if I'm thinking the low ball bidder might get 2 7s and a 5, I'm feeling a bit cautious about it, and I want to offer 30%, then I need to offer 30% with an 18% discount in order to win. That does feel pretty stretching. If I think they're going to drop 2 marks and I want to offer 30%, then my maximum discount really is 13%. That feels sort of more achievable. But, you know, some people might be offering much higher performance. So if I can get up to 33% and I offer a 15% discount, I've got a decent chance of winning. You know, they only need to drop 1 mark. So this is sort of a bit more reassuring. It is a bit more reassuring, but I still think it's quite, you know, it's a good argument here for a price floor, and just to try to mitigate the risks of sort of extremely low bids. So in summary, I'm nearly finished. You know, I think there's a lot to like about Restart. I really do. I think the department have done a really good job in the design of it. There's a clear evidence-based design, clear service standards, a focus on wanting bids that offer good quality customer services and personalised support, emphasise partnerships, are focused on, you know, trying to be stretching on outcomes. And it's really great to see references to sustainability and long-term impact, you know, and collaboration and sharing. And I think the commissioning model is good. You know, I think this does sort of stack up, and I think the commercial dialogue, and there's lots of detail in the terms and conditions which I won't go into, but you know, it looks good on things like open book accounting, on things like the scope to kind of claw back some money if risks don't materialise, various other things. But it's going to take time to build, and there are clearly some areas for improvement. I think in particular, you know, the absence of a job of measures of job quality is worrying. The lack of differentiation for participant groups is worrying. You know, and I think it does mean it needs to be really focused on in delivery, and the need for, and I think we need a price floor. So as ever, though, I think it will all depend on the quality of the bids offered, inevitably. Ensuring those are delivered, which is like really important. But my expectation, and certainly from, you know, conversations with people in the department in the last week or so, is that this is what I hope this is what will happen. My expectation is that, you know, the bids will then be the basis for ongoing contract management, which is great. Really critically dependent on the effectiveness of local delivery, joining up with that morass of provision and range of stuff that's being commissioned now. And I think it's really critically dependent on how we test, learn, share and improve during live running. And that was, again, one of the things I think really got wrong in the work programme, was the lack of collaboration between partners and providers, and that ability to learn and share. So look, I think this is a fantastic opportunity. I think it is properly like once in a generation that something like this comes along with such with such goodwill, I think, on all parts to make it work, and with decent funding. I think it's clear that the department want good quality offers. So I just sort of end with 5 things I would focus on if I were a bid writer and if I were assessing bids. First is that focus on the individual. So, the things that we know work: personalised support, frequent contact. It doesn't always need to be face-to-face, but staying in touch with people, keeping them motivated, keeping them engaged, keeping them focused on their objectives, keeping them positive, and just addressing that, the constant sort of difficulties being unemployed, applying for jobs, being rejected, not getting support. So, good quality personalised one-to-one support, having the right access to wider services, working effectively in partnership with others, and also commissioning and buying that yourself where it can't be met through other local provision. And in my view, I think there's a really strong case for specialist case loading, particularly for people aged over 50. I think also potentially for young people too. But specialist case loading, specialist advisors, and thinking about that delivery model differently for different groups. Secondly, the focus on partnerships, particularly with local government. I really hope the combined authorities and local enterprise partnerships and local partners will be sort of open to those conversations over the next week or so. I think ideally, it'd be great if if local areas were able to set out. This is a moment of maximum leverage for local government. So I think there's a real opportunity here for local areas to set out what they want the programme to look like in their patches, set the bar relatively high, and ask providers to meet those expectations. Also, real opportunities here to work with skills partners, with employer bodies and with others. And I think, we got into a lot of bun fights during the work programme about who was funding what and double payment and so on. Stepping back, I don't think this is about, work programme providers trying to access somebody else's provision or restart providers trying to access somebody else's provision or restart providers buying it themselves. I think if we could find genuinely collaborative models of kind of co-designing and co-funding provision locally, drawing on, for example, devolved adult education budget and restart money, and looking at how we can make that open to use our funding creatively to open that out to wider groups, I think that'd be fantastic. There's real opportunities to do this differently. A different approach to employer engagement. I don't know if Joe Ingold and people are on the call, but Joe in particular has done a lot of really good work. Joe and Tony Carr have done a lot of really good work on this. But I think this means thinking about how we work in partnership with employers, not just about matching and brokerage, but about the kind of the HR services and support we can offer to employers and working differently with employers, and in particular locally. I think it means being stretching on outcomes and not just trying to cut costs. And I think a real focus on what works and on industry-led collaboration. So plan, deliver, review, share and improve. So look, over to you. Interested in your views and comments. Interested, as I said, in any howlers, things I got wrong there. There might be bound to be some. But really, I think this time is ours for how we think about how we can best make this work. And a couple of pointers for that. I do think there are 4 different, I think there's potentially 4 ways to think about this around the services we offer, how it looks different for different groups in different areas, and what great looks like, and how we can work with the right people to do that. How we can support partnership formation over the next few weeks, because this is going to be messy, it's going to be tough, but I think it is, about how we get the right supply chains, the right partnerships, and the right local engagement. Can we support better employment progression? I'm really worried that we might well see a kind of an underemployment crisis over the next few years, and this programme isn't set up for that. So I'd like us to think about how we can do that. And then finally, collaboration, sharing, and improving. Where I've got ideas, obviously, but keen to think about how we do that. So thank you. I'll stop there. Over to you.
Okay. We can now take some comments and questions. I think that Scott is going to share this session, but he doesn't seem to have come back. So shall we make a start? I can see some raised hands.
I'm here.
Scott, carry on.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Yeah, we've got loads and loads of questions through that. And lots of comments, Tony, specifically around a great presentation. And thank you very much to Dan, Finn and Gary for answering some of the questions as we went along. Then it was very, very useful in a technical way. So we've got a question. One of the first questions came in from Gareth around the definition of unemployed, how long and how many hours and what pay they need to receive to be unemployed, as it were. So I don't know whether you're able to answer that question, Tony.
So my reading is that the definition is 12 months continuous on claimant count. So searching for work, combination of searching for work in UCE and or having previously been on JSA.
Okay, that's good, Tony. Thank you. And what do you? Nori asked what the balance of digital versus face-to-face is likely to be, and there was a follow-up question as well. I mean, the face-to-face on the monthly periodical is absolutely 100% face-to-face, isn't it? In terms of the specification. Yeah. I know that sounds like an obvious question, but it is because there's a follow-up question by Matt saying, can one-to-one support? Can that include pre-recorded tailored sessions like online training?
I doubt it. I don't think that will count. I think the expectation will be like a meaningful engagement every fortnight. I think the expectation would be that will be remote / digital, and that it'll be face-to-face monthly. So just give an example, like I think it was a majority. I think it was about 60 or 70%. I gave it in select committee. I haven't got it in front of me, but I think it was 60 or 70% of work program participants had fortnightly engagement in the work program, and that was probably mostly face to face. The ones who didn't tended to be people who had health conditions or older people. So anyone who's people who are harder to help. So anyone who says that it's not achievable, I don't sort of buy it. Anyone who says it's not desirable, I don't really sort of buy it either, to be honest. So I sort of feel like a meaningful fortnightly engagement is reasonable as a minimum expectation. That won't always be that way. I think it'll be less frequent. It'll be face to face. But I think it's worth thinking as well just about, and all of you do this sort of really well already, or many of you do this really well already. But, if somebody's applying, if you've got small caseloads, you can much better have the sort of model where when somebody's applying for a job, you can get in touch with them afterwards and ask how it went. You can have a conversation. You can go for a cup. We can't in the pandemic. We can go for a cup of tea, and you can talk about what we can do differently, and you can give people that support, and that that kind of. So it's not about ticking a spreadsheet to say I've had the fortnightly contact. It's about being by someone's side when they're really struggling to find work, which I think we do really well. But the people who tend not to get it tend to be people who are more disadvantaged, and so that's why it's important to have minimum standards.
Yeah, agreed. Can you give any more information, a slightly change of tack around the price accelerator? What's that involve?
Yeah, sure. So the accelerator is it exists in the work and health program as well, and so what will happen is providers will bid based on a set of costs to deliver a set of services to achieve a set of outcomes, and then that will generate a contract value. Then 30% of that contract value will be put into the delivery fee, and then for the remaining 70%, that will in effect an outcome rate will be worked out, which is basically a formula which will work out how much money do we need to pay you per outcome in order to pay you the contract value for achieving the level of performance you've set out. Then if you achieve more outcomes, then you make a profit. You make a bigger profit. Everyone's gonna make profit in their bids. Their bids will be based on making a profit at that level of performance. But if you make more outcomes, you'd make a bigger profit. If you make fewer outcomes, you'd make a smaller and potentially make a loss. So there won't be a formal kind of tariff like there was in the work program, and that's great news. It will be based on what providers bid on the basis of. The accelerator then will then basically say for performance up to 21%, then you get your payment is a factor of 1 of an outcome rate, and then for performance above 21% up to your offer, it'll be 1.4 of an outcome rate. But again, it will still be the case up to your offer. The total value of the outcome payments will sum, when it's multiplied by the number of outcomes you get, will sum 70% of the contract. It's just that there's a stretch that you only start to get really significant payments of basically 140%. Payments for performance above 21% outcomes is 140% of the payment below that level. And the idea is that kind of increases the incentive on you and the reward for over performance. But it does also mean that your outcome payments up to 21% are lower than they would have been if you didn't have an accelerator. So my concern is the accelerator, in theory, this is a model that goes back to 2007. It was originally developed for FND phase 2, and it was going to be really complicated with like a 5-step accelerator. And the idea is it minimizes parking because it encourages providers to reach further into the cohort. I don't think that's probably what has happened in the work and health program. I'd be surprised if it has. In my experience, innovative payment models tend to encourage caution rather than encourage like ambition. But let's see. So I don't think it's going to necessarily be a good guard against parking, but it does create quite strong incentives to overperform.
That actually brings us thank you, Tony. That was really well explained, actually, because it is quite complicated. That brings us nicely on to Claire and Michael have asked a couple of questions around specific disability and learning disability and the equality agenda. Will this programme prioritise equality groups, and is it appropriate for people who have learning disabilities and various other disability challenges?
So I think this is like a really top question for the department to set out really clearly early on what they're going to do. My expectation is that there'll be a kind of Goldilocks test on the programme where they'll say people who are sort of too disadvantaged to be supported through this sort of model won't be referred. People who are closer to work and can better be supported through Job Centre Plus won't be referred, and the ones who'll be referred will be the people who, in the department's view, are just right, but also are in that window of 12 to 18 months of claimant unemployment. Now, there will be people in that 12 to 18 month group. I think there'll be a lot of people who have health conditions and have impairments. I think most commonly that will be musculoskeletal and mental health conditions, and in many cases will be referred into the programme. I would expect that where people have sensory impairments, learning disabilities and difficulties, and may have quite severe mental health conditions, for example, the department, I hope they'll be commissioning more provision that is more specialist than this. But my expectation is in many cases people won't be referred into this programme, they'll be referred into other provision. But I'd really hope the department are not looking beyond impairments and aren't thinking that because somebody has got hearing loss or is visually impaired or has a learning disability, then they wouldn't benefit. They wouldn't benefit from Restart. Or they're going to need specialist support or whatever. So I hope it'll be we're making individual decisions. But I think a really key point I think that all of us need to be lobbying on is around the need for specialist disability employment support. And kind of top line of our budget submission, which we need to do this week, budget submissions are due in on Thursday. Top line of our budget submission will be, we've announced a lot to deal with the cyclical impact of the crisis. We now need to really focus on how we support people who are already out of work and disadvantaged. And top group there is people with long-term health conditions and it's disabled people.
That's great, Tony. Thank you. Annette Holdsworth talks about the work that Tony's done on employer engagement. That's Joe Ingold and Tony Carr, although Tony Wilson here has done quite a lot as well. If Annette wants to contact either ERSA or IEP, we can put them in touch with some of that work. Somebody's mentioned, will there be a collaboration portal, Tony? Well, there might be some information on that further down the line this week. So there's some interesting things happening at the moment. I've got Nikki says, is there really going to be a chance for innovation and smaller organisations to get involved? I think you've part answered this, but yeah, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think this is sort of a big worry, and I'm not close enough to. It might be that others might want to come in on this. Actually, I'm not close enough to some of the discussions we're happening already about this. But we've got 2 weeks left before the first round bids need to be submitted, and there's a really significant risk that providers lock down supply chains at this stage, and then that determines who's delivering what for the next 4 years. And this is a really short window to be doing that in. There isn't a kind of a top slice pot, for example, to fund innovative ideas over and above. There is, of course, other provision like flexible support funds and so on, but there's nothing specific to this program. So I don't know what do people think. In our many smaller providers, it's a really mixed bag at the moment. Some providers, a lot of providers have opened up for expressions of interest. They've been doing that over months. Are those conversations progressing? Do we need more consistency in the approach? Is there more we can do to support to try to minimise the burdens on smaller providers, to try to encourage more collaborative and open partnerships? I don't know.
I think there's quite a lot of that going on in the chat. I'm in Manchester. Who do I link to? What's going to happen with tier 3 providers in terms of tendering and stuff? So there's quite a lot of that going on, and obviously you and I and Elizabeth as well, and most people on the call can't speak for the department in terms of how that process is going. But and I can see that there is often, through people that I speak to, some frustration, and some people are going through this process quite well. So yeah, it's quite quite challenging. There's no doubt. If I'm sure we can get some comments in the chat, people will have some intellectual capital that they can share with people, and I know Gary's doing a really good job from the department there to give some answers. But one maybe for you or for Elizabeth. Jeanette asks, what is the impact on this of leaving Europe?
Well, I think it's going to, I think all other things being equal, like us leaving the EU's it will have a negative impact on the economy and on the labour market, and it's going to, it's going to mean there's fewer jobs being offered, and there's more competition for those jobs. So it's it's definitely a negative in that sense. I think we can, are there silver linings if we can have a really good and joined up conversation between employment providers and skills services, and talk to employers about, for example, construction is a case in point. We've seen a lot of people leaving the UK, particularly in the early parts of the pandemic, who are European workers off construction sites. Can we do more to fill those jobs? But I think we're kind of, I don't know. It's not there's not going to be much that's positive, but potentially it does mean that there's more government focus on how we can better join up employment and skills support, and there's potentially more opportunities to have those sorts of conversations with employers.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, go on.
No, go.
Well, I was going to say, although we are leaving Europe, etc., it has also led to some relaxing of rules around recruiting internationally, and also some requirements on employers. Something that we ourselves are grappling with, because we can't discriminate against people who are applying from outside the EU, for example, and it's not really going to be enough just to say sorry, we don't have a sponsorship visa. So for jobs for higher paying jobs, in some respects, the market has become more global, but it's and more bureaucratic as well. But that's going to be likely be for slightly different groups than people we're supporting through Restart.
Yeah, Elizabeth, do you have? You've always got an opinion on Shared Prosperity Fund. I just wonder whether there's anything there.
Well, I think there's a couple of things to say. At ERSA, we've got a new colleague, Callum Carson, who I think was introduced to people through the ERSA Bulletin last week. Callum will be working with the likes of Tony and others to try and disseminate to ERSA members the impact on local labour markets. And I think something like Brexit can make differences at local levels that we really need to be taking into account. But also, as part of the ongoing market engagement work that ERSA is doing, we will be looking, and we are talking to the DWP about future commissioning and what's going to happen at Tier 2 level, and what's going to happen at Tier 3, and what's going to happen as ESF reserves are used and the shared prosperity funding comes in. So I think it's just a case of watch the ERSA space, because this is very much top of our agenda in 2021.
Yeah, and thanks, Elizabeth. And to take that liberty, as we're kind of talking about, I suppose, solutions and information, I'm just going to share a couple of slides with everyone in terms of some of the work that IEP has been doing around recruitment, onboarding and learning and development, if that's okay. And then we'll get back to questions. I know people are putting lots and lots of stuff on the chat there. So if you just bear with me just a second. Just making sure that the technology works here. I'm really keenly interested in the sorry, I can't get that on a slideshow. Look, I'm really keenly interested in the IEP and collaboration. This is a really good example of that, and we've been working really hard to make sure that we can collaborate effectively. And I'm also interested in the social value piece in the ITT, and that become really apparent in a moment, and not surprising to all. Tony, can you just tell me you can see that, please? Even though it's not in PowerPoint presentation mode.
Yeah, we can, yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, that's wonderful. So look, we're going to need thousands of people to become employability practitioners throughout this programme and the uplift into that. That's across the public, private and charitable sector in terms of when we deliver. Those practitioners are going to be coming online over the next couple of years to help serve customers really well. All the qualitative approaches through the bid are really exciting for me, because obviously people are what makes this work effectively. One of the key challenges that we've got is that 80%, that's our analysis and guesstimate as it were, are going to be doing this for the very first time. So they'll be coming from related occupations and with relatable skill sets, but ultimately that remains a challenge that they haven't done that before. We're all here to aid the economic recovery, and we're all here to make sure that we get the best possible quality outcomes for the customers, for the participants going through the programme. Tony has stated how challenging that may well be, and ultimately his data and his analysis are far better than anything I can do. But ultimately, the ICT states in the social value proposition about investing in workforce development, increasing in work progression, employee well-being, and increasing staff retention. There is both the moral and the qualitative obligation to do that as organisations, but there is also the financial and commercial obligation to do that. If we retain staff, if we don't see what has happened in programmes before, a natural attrition after 2 or 3 months, when we start to talk to recruits about what they need to do in their role and the challenges in terms of outcome performance, then ultimately, if we set them up properly to begin with and they have the right skill sets, we will all win effectively. Another element is recruiting in an unbiased and representative way. And DOBP are asking within the ITT how you support workforce development, how you provide additional training and development for existing employees, and supporting qualifications, mentoring and supporting those individuals that work for you. Anyway, so just really quickly, we come up with a couple of solutions. One is the IEP Talent Academy, which is a recruitment and onboarding service which can help support people through that. It's not the only option. It's not the only thing you should be doing. Parts of it can be used with your own internal recruitment departments. But the whole point is that it accesses the IEP learning development, and it gets people in the right state, in the right fit state, to actually be onboarded into the organisation in which they're being employed. And probably even more importantly than that, talking about the training development before, the IEP now has, with the support of many organisations across the sector, a career journey. So what we're now doing within the employability sector is creating an attractive proposition for people who are working.
For Abdullah. Abdullah, it's Amanda Littlewood from.
Hi, Amanda. Can you just put yourself on mute? Do you mind? Sorry. So we have now a career pathway to make it attractive for people to come into the sector, so people can see that there is a career, people can see that there is the opportunity to progress throughout their career within the employability sector, and this becomes an attractive place to be, bearing in mind that we need, back to the first slide, tens of thousands of people to come and do this job effectively, and we need them to be working to the greatest of their capacity and capability. So once again, the IEP is really interested in collaboration, and it's very, very acutely interested in the social value element, the 15%, although we're interested in everything else, but in terms of the 15% that is the ITT. So thank you very much for that. And we'll come back to, I think I've stopped sharing, we'll come back to questions. We've got a couple of participants with their hands up. I can only assume that Pratibha, David, and we've got three people with their hands up. Sorry, it's not easy to do the chat. And Jude, are you not able to put your questions in the chat? Bear with me, I've now lost the chat. That's not very helpful.
That's okay. While you were talking, Gary, Gary, sorry, I've been reading Gary's comments on the.
Yeah, we can't chat. Why?
Sorry, Scott, while you're talking, I was having a quick look at some of the points in the chat. So I'm happy to pick up a few of these. So Devlin asked about, hi Devlin, Devlin asked about referral routes in, and whether this is only Job Centre Plus. Well, I think when Devlin pointed out, it is only Job Centre Plus. The only people at the moment who can refer in or via DWP. That is what the tender says. There is scope for them to refer in people who aren't in that kind of that priority group of restart, so 12-month claiming unemployed. But at the moment, it's saying that'll be about 10% of referrals. I think there's a decent argument for opening this up more broadly to people who are long-term unemployed, long-term workless, but who are available for work and you know, actively looking for work, etc., but may not meet the benefit criteria. I think I suspect that'll be something for a year or so down the line, a couple of years down the line potentially, once we've got a clearer made more progress on supporting those who are claiming unemployed. But I do think this is something we haven't done very well in recent years through sort of mainstream programs, but I suspect could do better. There was a question about what we mean by local, and could that be like neighbourhood level, or is that going to be kind of city region level or whatever. And this is the point I didn't make in the conversation, but I do think in the presentation rather. But there is an issue here that, local, sometimes, I've worked in DWP for a while, and sometimes local means anything that isn't national if you're in DWP. If you work in a local authority, local does tend to mean neighbourhood. And, even looking at LEP level, it doesn't feel very local if you're in a local authority. And some of these CPAs are really diverse, particularly some of those, that sort of East Central one. So I think getting that balance right is going to be really hard. And there isn't a lot of space in the bids to set out what how it is locally tailored. We're talking about a couple of pages. So my expectation is at this stage, the bid stage, people are going to be wanting to evidence they've got buy-in and partnerships at the kind of buying authority / LEP level would be my expectation. But I really hope bidders are setting out how they're going to deliver a kind of a more like a neighbourhood level service, as in joining up with neighbourhood services if they can, in terms of the delivery model, because I think that is going to be pretty important. People, particularly long-term unemployed people, tend not to travel particularly far for work, particularly far generally, and I think engaging in neighbourhood level is better where we can. There's also finally just some questions about things like digital delivery and the pandemic impact. I didn't talk about this at all in the presentation really, but there is a big question mark. The pandemic is barely referenced in the tender documents. I think there's quite a strong assumption that by the autumn we're not back to normal, but we're back to being able to deliver the sorts of services we're used to delivering. That is quite a big assumption. And it's something that we all need to think through the sort of risks of, and the department will need to think through too. I mean, I think I really hope we're able to deliver face-to-face services, and if we're not, we really need to be thinking about how we make sure people have got in the same, rather than spending money on paying people's bus fares, which for a face-to-face service, which is what we've been talking about in the chat, which is right. Some of that money could be used to buy people laptops and buy people tech, and to make sure people have got credit on their phone and are able to use that technology. So we are going to need to invest. I think digital access is a much bigger issue than digital capability when we're talking about people with disadvantage and on a low income. So I think there's more work we'll need to do on that. You're muted there, Scott.
Can we get, sorry, Tony, thank you. Can we get Hindocha Pratibha to ask your question, please, as you're not able to use the chat.
Hi, basically I wanted to ask a question on the match funding. Is there any match funding needed for this bid?
Yeah, so there's no European money involved in this. It's all government funding. It's program funding, so program DEL. So I think there's no match. If you can get on the supply chain, then the provider. There's one. I don't know what arrangements providers are generally making at the moment around things like management fees in bids, but hopefully, hopefully there'll be pretty strong flow through of the funding straight to supply chain providers.
Thank you, Tony. David Kersey, if you don't mind.
Hiya, can you hear me? Some of us haven't got the chat function on our Teams for some reason. That's why I was interrupting earlier. Apologies for that. I just want to ask three things really. One is, what is happening about alignment with current ESF programmes? In Coventry, I work for Coventry City Council. We've got major new ESF programmes that are due to run until 2023, which are due to be supporting exactly the same client groups as the ones that have been identified for restarts. And I think there's a real danger of duplication and people tripping over each other and competing where they shouldn't be. Second question is about stakeholder and local integration requirements. I've had a lot of queries from both primes, both on CARES and specifically on Restart. We've given out a lot of information from the local authority. How will checks be made by DWP that primes will actually follow through on commitments to work with stakeholders and local authorities should they be successful with bids? Because I think that what goes in a bid doesn't always get followed up on the ground. And the third point I want to make is about digital inclusion. I know it's been covered, but I just want to stress the point, because the reality on the ground is that many of the most excluded groups, it's not just older people, but quite a lot of young people simply don't have the equipment or cannot afford the data costs required to access services online. And I think there needs to be some alignment with initiatives that are going on elsewhere in government and at local level to improve access to digital online services, and that isn't just for lockdown but beyond it as well. Thanks.
No, I think that third point, I think that's absolutely spot on. I mean, we've done, as you'd expect, like this is something that's been raised quite a lot with us and in sort of research projects and different things since the pandemic began. How do we support digital inclusion? And what comes back again and again is it's about access. It's about access, and it's about kit, and it's about broadband, and so I do think, it's a really good point. It's not one I covered in presentation, but it's an important takeaway, certainly for me, from this session. I think about doing things like this again in the near future, and conversations we're having with providers. I mean, I think that needs to be right near the top of the list of what people are thinking about. What is their offer going to be to support digital inclusion and access to digital technology for participants? Because that's not going to end with the ending or easing social distance restrictions. I mean, in that sense, we will continue to work in quite different ways. I mean, expectation people are able to have conversations like these, and we'll have the credit and we'll have the tech to do it. On the point about how this will actually be managed, Gary's answering a lot of comments in the chat already, but I'd say I'm sort of I fully expect that the department will take the bids as will become the contract. I mean, it will legally become the contract, but I think the bids, they will manage the bids as if they are the contract, and what is set out there, providers will need to deliver, and if they're not delivering it, then there'll be a sort of comply or explain, and potential consequent impacts on potential consequent kind of contract management impacts. I think the issue though is the extent to which the department can meaningfully enforce that without kind of getting into quite difficult stuff with providers around withholding the service delivery fee, for example. That's the most obvious way to do it. If you're not delivering the service you said, then we won't give you the delivery fee element, the 30% element. But there's obviously a risk that kind of then impacts on performance and creates a kind of vicious circle. But I hope the department will be taking that stuff really seriously, be managing it really tightly. And on fit with ESF, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think certainly if your ESF program is running over the next year or 18 months, there's going to be more than enough people in this group to support. Don't wait for restart, and restart won't and restart won't be the only show in town. I think longer term, I think restart is so big that this will be the means by which long-term claimant unemployed are supported, and will be increasingly designing and fitting other provision like Shared Prosperity Fund to meet other needs and support groups not served through restart, would be my expectation.
Thank you, Tony. Very comprehensive as ever. We've just got Jude Day now with the hand up, if you wouldn't mind, Jude.
Hello, yep, thanks very much. Leading on from that question, actually, Tony, we all know that obviously getting the right people on the right programme, which is what you were just referring to, do you know that if that first time that participant sits down with the advisor, that the advisor is still able to signpost to other projects? At the moment, if they sit down that first start meeting with the advisor, they're kind of on the programme. There isn't any sort of wiggle room from that point onwards. Whereas if we had the ability to still refer on to other projects at that point of sitting down, that first meeting, I think that would ensure that everybody gets onto the right programme. And the second point is the HMRC, the 3,700 is generally fine, but we do know there's not a lot of anomalies in the system with when and how employers put information onto that. And I'm just wondering, there's not a lot about in-work support, but primes are going to have to put in-work support, if nothing else, to know that that person's still doing the same hours, when they're going to reach outcome, etc. And I just wanted your thoughts about that as well, really.
Yeah, so two excellent questions. On the second one, I mean, this is the big, one of the big disappointments in the programme, I think, is it's quite explicit actually in the tender document that they're not expecting the delivery of in-work support, and I think that's a shame. I can understand, it's a long story, and I can kind of understand why I've ended up at this point. But there's been a lot of progress in the last few years about trying to improve how we deliver in-work support, and also how we support progression for low-paid workers, and how we improve job security. And it kind of feels like we just, that's in the too difficult box for restart. So we'll just leave it over here. Which is, given that this is this program we're running, this program is going to be the kind of elephant in the employability room for the next 4 years. It is a real shame it's not in it. But that doesn't stop us from doing it, whether it's through restart, through other provisions. I don't think we should lose sight of it. The second, your first question, sorry, I should have written it down. Sorry, what was the point?
It's just when that first
about
time.
being able to refer on. So there's an important reason why the department won't do that. I think you're right. I mean, I agree in principle. The important reason the department won't do that is that because this is such an outcome-based program, and it's a payment by results model, quite a significant risk if providers could turn people down, that you get quite a lot of gaming where providers would turn down people who they think are not going to achieve outcomes, and only sign on the people who are going to achieve outcomes. And you might end up creating a sort of a system where providers are just lining up partners to refer the too difficult people onto in order to sort of maximize their performance. Now, you could deal with that at extremes. You could deal with that at extremes, definitely. You wouldn't necessarily be able to at the margins. So this is one of the real downsides of moving to payment by results models. It ties to Devon's question earlier about outreach and engagement, treating people off the street or through other ways. Is same sort of thing. You get this risk of cherry picking where providers might be quite strongly, and you see this in some local government provision, where some local, not many, but some local areas have used very outcome-based models and also quite open recruitment. There's quite a strong incentive to just go and find the most employable people, enroll them, and get them into jobs very quickly. So, PBR, we kind of put PBR, well, we don't, but people can often put PBR on a pedestal as a means of driving better outcomes and performance, but it has these quite significant drawbacks. It can drive the wrong behaviour if you don't really tightly control who goes on the programme. So unfortunately, I don't think the department will address that. The assumption is that the Job Centre Plus coach will. Now, one way you could address it, which was what was meant to happen with Work and Health programme, would be to have certain statutory referral organisations which could refer people in as well. And then you could support those organisations to identify and engage the right people. That's a model I think that's well worth exploring. A linked thing would be to say that you might have Job Centre Plus coaches as the gatekeeper, and you could refer in, and the Job Centre Plus coaches would then make the assessment, and they could consider restart against other provision. Again, that could work, but it's not there at the moment in the design.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony, again. And there's another really interesting question around self-employment. And around the rules of, I don't know whether anyone's able to answer that at this moment in time, but it's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, and so so it is in there. There's quite a lot in the detail of the specification about self-employment, and about the ability to support people who are self-employed, for example, and that self-employment will count as an outcome, but it isn't counted. But self-employed income isn't counted through PAYE, and so beg your pardon, isn't counted through the HMRC RTI feed, and so as a consequence, it won't be recorded in the same way. So the department have set out that there's quite a complicated process for validating it, basically. But in effect, you have to provide like audit evidence that somebody is self-employed. And then the department has quite a bit of discretion around what they'll accept and what they won't, and what will count as meaningful self-employment and what wouldn't. I'm not massively up on. I mean, I've read it, but I'm not massively up in the detail of what some of the risks and issues of that might be. But I do think they'll be, I suspect they'll be quite keen to minimise the risks that people are recording self-employed outcomes that aren't kind of legitimate, real work, as it were. But it's going to be a much different process to the kind of the automatic feed that they'll be getting from HMRC for employees.
Okay. Alex has raised the point again around price floor. I know you had some very specific views, Tony, in your presentation. How do we kind of expedite that? Because I think Gary's comment back was that would be done in dialogue post tender. So
yeah, exactly. So I mean, on paper, I just stress on paper, this doesn't in any way reflect what will happen or whatever, but on paper, yeah, exactly. Bidders will submit their offers. There'll be a dialogue process, and then there'll be a revised set of tender documents that people then need to submit their best and final offers for. So what you could imagine happening would be that in that dialogue process, you have a range, and you've got a range of price offers and a range of performance offers, and you have outliers at either end of that. And you could imagine the department narrowing the range and saying, well, everybody is coming with a performance offer of 28 to 35%. So we're going to say we want everyone to we want best and final offer to be in a narrower range of we're going to take out the 25 and we're going to make best and final offer, I don't know, 30 to 33%. And they might say everyone's come in with a range on price that might be wider, and there might be an outlier that's come in at 1,500 or 1,400. Well, we're going to set a price floor and a performance a narrower but higher performance range, and so you need to try and hit within that. That would be one way of doing it. I've not appreciated actually. Gary's made the point in comments that the IPES that was process for an IPES, so providers would have had some experience of that.
Yeah, Gary's also reiterated, thank you, Tony. Gary's also reiterated that all the documents to do with the ITT, to do with the tender specification, to do with the evaluation of the bids is within the virtual data room that both ERSA and the IEP have published the details for anyone. I think Gary's also, I think I put a link in the chat, and Gary's also reiterated some information. But if you're struggling to get through to that, then please give either us or the IEP a nod, and we can point you in the right direction. I've also got some instructions about where you need to go to find the documents, so that's quite useful. Any more questions? Laura's put a useful link there around.
David has put in, David Robert Shaw knows this better than me, that specifically for self-employment, you've got to meet the UC gainfully self-employed marker, which you're right is a much higher bar than what might be a sort of more discretionary model. So that's important to note. And Gareth has made the point about the minimum income floor.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're quite a grilling today, Tony, but we've got Sue Ormiston, who doesn't have access to chat's got a question.
Oh, great. Hello, Sue.
Hello, Tony. For those who don't know, I'm from the National Lottery Community Fund and work on a programme called Building Better Opportunities, which is for the furthest from the labour market. And my question to you is really, the restart sounds great and very, very positive. And do you think there's still room for a programme like Building Better Opportunities? Or do you think there's a risk that our grant holders will suddenly stop receiving referrals from the job centres because they'll be sending everybody to restart?
So I think there's definitely a really big opportunity for Building Better Opportunities or equivalent provision. I think the thing that we need to fairly quickly sort of work through will be, as in quick, I mean over the next 6 months really, is where those boundaries are and the fit with different forms of provision. Because I would say, like, the challenges we're facing go far beyond how we support this particular group of longer term claimant unemployed. So I wouldn't, if you were thinking about two potential models, one might be where you use BBO or equivalent to augment and supplement and increase funding targeted at these groups. Another might be where you identify other groups who aren't being served through mainstream provision. I would definitely favour the latter over the former. And as I say, I would particularly be thinking about people who, for example, aren't on benefit or on different benefits, so they're not claiming unemployed, and people who have health conditions, long-term health conditions, disabled people. And a really important point was made in the comment boxes, which again I also hadn't addressed in my presentation, apologies, is the particular impacts of the pandemic on some disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. So in particular, lone parents, single parents, stand out for me as a group that's been really hard hit in this crisis, and also people in quite insecure, low-paid work and who can cycle in and out of work and miss out on a lot of support, whether that's welfare support or whether that's job retention scheme type support, and helping people get more sustainable, better quality employment. It's going to be really important because a lot of them just won't touch the sides on mainstream employment programs. So yeah, more important than ever, I think. Just got to find the right fit, make it all fit together.
Yeah, thank you.
We've got John McDonough has a question. He's my final hand raised.
Hi, John.
Hi, Tony. Brilliant as ever. So thank you for that. It's more a few points than questions or reflections. If you want some of them, does that work?
Go for it. You got the floor's yours. Don't seek forgiveness rather than permission, eh?
I'm just being polite because it's still the new year. But anyway, I come in pace on here, so that's fine. We've talked about the pre-mortem before, and I have I know a number of people on here, including Gary. And for those that don't know, the pre-mortem is the opposite of the post-mortem. So a few things just in general that feed into this. Anybody who's worked in this knows there's always a problem around referrals. And I think the guy in Coventry was making a point there, and anybody who's around ESF, etc., is going to know that's a challenge. Now, we've just come up off the bat of a big chunk of delivery for people who've been recently made unemployed, and there was a massive problem around referrals for that. So your expectation would be people who've just lost the job would be keen on that, and yet there's an issue there anyway. Bring in long-term unemployed, and then it comes down to, well, is this any good or not? And the majority of work coaches we've dealt with around the country can very rarely point to something that they rate. So then you've got a problem around if they've got confidence and belief in it, and if they haven't, why they're going to do it, because they're going to see these people when they come back, etc. And then I'm not saying that mandation is the answer, but without that tool, there could be a real issue around referrals. The timescales obviously are ridiculous. Why not take a bit more time and try and get this right? Because obviously that blocks out innovation as well. I think if you go to, look back over the history of this and you say, right, what have you got that really works for the long-term unemployed? And that can include local authorities and includes LEPs, etc. as well, and combined authorities. Very little have got anything. So it comes back to the same question, well, what are you going to do differently this time? It's potentially Einstein's definition of insanity. The budget's light, I think, certainly in terms of what we would do. We know that local authorities, most of them, I mean, we did a bit with Coventry last year, but a lot of them have been absolutely decimated. So there's a limit of capacity there anyway, let alone with what COVID's brought. And all of this then combines to create even more challenges for those disadvantaged groups that a lot of people have been raising already, as we know. There's always a danger that this ends up trying to reverse engineer a press release for the politicians, which is not going to help us. And I think, how do we ensure that the essential components are in, and do they know what they are?
All right, thank you, John. Sorry, John, thank you for that. Gary's put in the chat that DWP are running a formal pre-mortem this month. Any reflections there, Tony, quickly on John's point?
No, I think I've got really good points there. I mean, I think on timing, I think the sort of moment of maximum peril is this summer, really. It's kind of spring, summertime. And so it's really important to have it up and running quickly, but it does mean it's massively rushed, and it is going to get in the way of the ability to sort of form partnerships and get this right. I think on your point, John, about is it enough money and is it going to be intensive and specialised enough? I think it isn't going to be to deliver a really kind of specialist high intensity program. I think though it will be to deliver a really, really good quality employment service for the long-term unemployed. Certainly, better funded than the work program, and a lot of potential. But you're right, this isn't the be all and end all by any means.
Our colleague Patrick Hughes has asked if there will be part of John's comment when he first came on the camera, actually, around expected referrals in CPAs. I don't know whether you can answer that or. Yeah,
there are. And so there's a spreadsheet that has all the referral pattern over months, and so there's an expectation that there's referral volumes have been set out in quite some detail, and the department have been clear that this is all it's kind of without prejudice, or they reserve the right to refer fewer people, etc., potentially more as well. So my view, which I might well be proved wrong, I don't know, but I'm sort of generally fairly sort of optimistic about prospects a bit further out over the next kind of couple of years. I certainly don't subscribe to the kind of there are no jobs thing. My view is that the volumes look a little bit high over the life of the programme, but the real demand is going to be over the next 18 months. It's going to be massive demand, particularly over the next year or so. I think longer term, I wouldn't be surprised if there's somewhat fewer people reaching a 12-month point. Don't view that as a risk, though. I mean, the money is in the programme, so that creates an opportunity then to think about how we can broaden this out for more early access and to think about supporting different groups. As Gary also said in the point, when I was saying, enforce the bids, that this isn't to stifle innovation. There'll be annual contract reviews. So hopefully that annual contract review could include thinking about some potentially more substantive changes if we want to support different groups who might be further from work with different funding, or even if we wanted to try to support in-work progression or support people who are cycling in low pay. So there's opportunities there. Patrick also made a point about performance, which Gary sort of partially answered, and when performance data will be published. I think it's worth sort of holding that thought. One of the real problems with the work programme was it got off to a terrible start because the government at the time refused to publish anything for ages. When it did publish stuff, it did it in such a kind of ham-fisted way that it looked like the programme was failing terribly. We need to think much more collaboratively as an industry about how we describe how programs work and how performance is achieved. And I think hopefully that should mean publishing more often, being more transparent in what we publish, and publishing a broader range of stuff. So we're not just publishing outcomes, we're also talking about the services that are delivered, people's satisfaction with those services, what partners are involved, etc. So my ideal would be that we actually have more like a kind of dashboard that we could publish and do it regularly and just keep it up to date. And we could tell a story about how it takes time for performance to build, but how we're actually delivering really important public services that are helping to support really disadvantaged communities and support the recovery from the crisis.
Thank you, Tony. I think we've still got some comments coming through, but I think we're out of questions now. Yeah, it's been absolutely amazing getting your insights into that activity. If we come to Elizabeth with a bit of summing up and some reflections, then I'll have the last say, which is unlike me. But I think it'd be really useful to get that. And once again, huge thanks, Tony. So Elizabeth, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that it's been a real inspiration having Tony with us this morning, but also the sort of collaboration event with the IEP, which I'm sure is really welcomed by the sector, even if it's just the time saver of not attending 2 versions of this. But I think on a serious note, as we move forward with Restart and whatever else is commissioned in 2021, the whole thing about the industry collaborating is really, really important. So let's keep building on that. From an ERSA point of view, we did the whole range of market engagement events and trying to introduce people to the new organisations and the existing primes that had landed in the different CPAs. And we will be continuing to do that as we move forward with Tier 2 commissioning, with Tier 3, and as we get a feel for what's going to happen with the Shared Prosperity Fund. So the importance of partnerships, and we're already seeing with Restart some really diverse CPAs. I think that brings to the fore the localism agenda and the real importance about people who understand local labour markets right down to a very small level of detail. So ERSA will continue to work on that through the Employer Engagement Forum and through the CPA-based events. We picked up a little bit earlier on about digital exclusion, and of course we will be picking that up at the digital forums. So I'd like to think that going further forwards, we will collaborate on what works and the collaboration and how we stretch outcomes and how we build partnerships. And I think there's a real opportunity there for ERSA and the IEP and the IES and others to work together on that. So I'm looking forward to that as we get going into 2021. And also just to look at, this is a period of expansion. How do we look at the long-term lessons and sustainability of the sector? And again, real opportunity to work ERSA, IEP and others on that. So thanks, Tony. Thanks, Scott. It's been a pleasure doing the joint event with you. I hope this is the first of many more, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And just really, really quickly before we wrap up, you're absolutely right around the collaboration agenda. It's key to making sure that we deliver on our promises. This is a huge opportunity. I mean, I sit kind of outside of this in the kind of provider network, and it's a huge opportunity with that. But with that comes great responsibility to get it right and to really achieve good work outcomes for the customers that come through that. I'm not teaching people to suck eggs. We're a people business, people supporting other people. And without really good quality staff members delivering excellent services, delivering great outcomes, we won't achieve what we need to do. So look, we're working alongside IES, working alongside ERSA. We're really happy to be doing so and collaborating. But it is our responsibility as a sector in the round to make sure that what we're delivering is the best it possibly can be. All right. So thank you very much for your time today, Tony. It was amazing. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's great collaboration in action, as it were. And thank you very much for everyone for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Tony, could you stay on for a sec?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah.